Everybody, I'm very happy to host this webinar. It's the third one leading to our Cultural Mobility Forum happening next week already. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We usually have participants from different time zones joining our online events. As you know, this webinar is entitled The International Mobility of Young Arts Workers, Trends, Facts, and Funds. And we're going to talk about money and opportunities today. My name is Johan Flock. I'm the Director of Operations at On the Move. And as you know, On the Move is an EU, I would say, international network gathering 85 members from 31 countries. We are supported by the Creative Europe program and the French Ministry of Culture. So together with my colleague Marie, we are hosting this webinar, and you will meet a third colleague of On the Move today, Claire Wilson. She will be presenting one of our one of our key publications. So look, for participants with visual impairment, I just want to say and describe myself quickly. I'm a white man. I have brown, graying hair. I have facial hair. I'm wearing orange reading glasses, and I have an orange t-shirt today. And I'm sitting in front of a white background with a big black On the Move logo. So, a little bit of housekeeping. At the moment, only our panelists and myself will have their sound and camera on, but we are strongly encouraging you to post comments and questions in the chat throughout our panel discussion, and I will make sure to give you the floor towards the end of the webinar, so we can exchange on the two main publications that we are presenting to you today. So as I said, this webinar is really the third and last pre-forum webinar. We are really heading towards our Cultural Mobility Forum. And this forum is very special to us because it's a moment not only where we gather a lot of On the Move members, a lot of international experts, but also meet with the local scene in Riga. And we will address the mobility, the international circulation of young and emerging artists, which I think is a very important topic today. So with me today, I have several speakers. So I want to welcome them and maybe to present them briefly to you. So with me today, I have Hanna Olsson. Anna is a dear colleague working for Transeuropal and particularly on a project very dear to my heart, the International Resource Office. Anna and this office is based in the Skåne region, the south region of Sweden, in Lund and Malmö. So welcome, Hanna, and thank you for being with us today. We have also Kama Sigumfert. Kama is also a very dear colleague. We worked together many years ago. Kama is a very experienced international project manager. She worked for key organization in Sweden, at Transeuropal, but mainly in Denmark, at festivals and venues. She's a specialist in the dance field, but also the outdoor arts field, the circus field. And she's currently working for the Christian Inningmarsen company in Denmark. So welcome, Kama. And so with me also we have Claire Wilson. So Claire is a proud team member of On the Move, but she's also a freelance editor and researcher. She has been collaborating with the Asia Europe Foundation and their cultural platform called ASEF Culture 360. Claire is originally from Australia, but she's been based in Barcelona, Spain for many years now, and she's been collaborating with several organizations focusing on international relations. So Claire has been particularly instrumental to both publication, the Cultural Mobility Funding Guide and the yearbook that she will be presenting later on. And last but not least, together with these three distinguished ladies, we have Andrew Organ. And Andrew is based in Wales. He's a multidisciplinary artist, a poet, a musician, but also an arts writer. He's a specialist of many cultural expressions. And we were in touch earlier as he was contributing to the life of the Arts Council of Wales. So Andrew has a very special role today. He will be listening to our conversation and presenting a summary or the main takeaways as a young reporter of this conversation. So welcome also, Andrew. So just to let you know, I'm not going to be, talking. The purpose is for me to leave the floor to the beautiful experts that's contributing to our recent publications and publication that I feel you will also find very interesting for one on the one hand because you will find many funding opportunities and we know we love finding funding opportunities and work opportunities. And the second publication, our yearbook, because you will get, I would say, a clear overview of the main trends, mobility trends at global level, but also you will access information around the main theme of our Cultural Mobility Forum, the international mobility of young and emerging artists. So to start this webinar, I would like to invite Hanna and Kama to open their mic and to answer a very, in a way, easy question. It's a question that has become some sort of tradition on the course of this journey leading to the forum. And this question is, how was it for you as a young professional to actually embrace an international trajectory and to, embrace this international dimension? Was it easy? Was it difficult? How was it for you? So maybe we start with you, Hanna.
I think there has been an increasing interest in general in international collaborations in the past years after the pandemic. And it's also, of course, connected to decreased national funding. So I think both for artists in general and for emerging artists that
The question is more for you. How was it for you when you were young and you
for me,
decided
sorry, when I was young, I'm sorry, I totally misunderstood the question. When I was young, well, I was in the US, but that was before my professional career as a high school student for 1 year. So that's where my international, knowledge in that sense started. I lived for 10 months in the US. And I didn't start my professional career in that sense with international collaborations, but for the last 15 years I have. It took a few years since I started to work in international context in that sense, but it has always, been of interest, absolutely, to work in international and multicultural environments.
It's interesting that all started with education. So having the opportunity to study abroad. What about you, Kama? How was it for you?
Well, for me, the gateway was really EU projects that I was propelled into by an organization that never did a Creative Europe project before. And I was working there with some information and communication. And it was just decided that the now Dansehallen was an organization that should be able to apply, be a strong applicant, and then I was the most obvious person there to to get myself involved in it. So that's really how it started. And so that's, for me, that has been the main way to collaborate through various EU projects and Nordic projects, because we also complemented the first EU project with a lot of Nordic funding. So
That's also interesting. Like we jump directly into the funding systems and how arts organization, develop projects, but also bring partners and work and follow, not only follow the money, but also follow the way arts organization and institution work, which is always in partnerships, either with artists, cultural workers, but also colleague and peer organizations. I'm sharing this visual because this is our new cultural mobility funding guide. So many of the participants in the room haven't yet had the chance to delve into this, but this is what we are going to talk about a little bit together with Kama and Anna. It's a document of almost 300 pages, but we've made things really clever, in a clever way, hopefully, to help everybody delve into its content. So this guide focuses on eight countries, including Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Sweden. And what we do and propose each time is a table of content that is interactive and help the users to really find their way through the publication. So not only to discover the funding opportunities that exist at international level, like this chapter with many, many funds that could support your project, but also delving into national mappings where you can find money in various countries of the Nordic Baltic region. So this is just to give everybody a sense of what you will discover in this guide. And Kama and Anna, you both worked on this guide. You were part of the researchers team that we put together in order to collect information, assess, find, review, revisit, doing almost a detective job sometimes to make sure that the information posted in this guide was reliable and updated. So I would like to ask you a little bit about this experience itself, how easy or difficult it was to find the funds available for arts and culture, and these funds that are supporting the international circulation of artists and their works. So you, Anna, you focused on Sweden. Could you tell us a little bit, how was it? Was it difficult to find all these funds and put them together?
There was a funding guide previously on the MOVE funding guide from 2017. So that was absolutely helpful, but it turned out to be more of a reference document because a lot of things had happened during these 8 years. So I had to start, when it came to the details, I had to start pretty much from scratch. So an update was very much welcome and needed, I think. And there's been some changes in the public funding, so some funds that were outsourced is now back and done through the Art Council and so forth. So it was a reference document, but I had to do quite some research also to get all the details in place.
And this is, I would say, interesting also because it felt like the COVID times almost change everything, even if all these institutions, I mean, that we are talking about, arts councils, grants committee, ministries of culture, I mean, in many countries, these institutions are very stable. But at the same time, it felt like the COVID pandemic really changed many, I mean, the shape and size of grants available, but also the orientation, the priorities they were trying to put into place? Did you find also this, that new priorities or new areas were investigated by these funding schemes?
Not that much, to be honest, actually. So maybe that's something I'm missing a little bit, that maybe should have happened. But no, it was more that's yeah, some things were missing and some things were changed from one granting body to a funding body to another. So not a lot in that sense, I would say, actually.
Okay, okay, fair enough. So Kama, you work on not only the Danish mapping, but also on this first very big international chapter, which is a chapter that gather funding sources outside the countries in focus and opportunities that may sit in America, in Canada, in the Netherlands, in other parts of the region in focus. So, same question, Kama, for you. How was it? Was it difficult to map these funding sources? Was it easy?
I mean, it's like Hannah said, I think it would have been very challenging if I didn't have the last version, a place to start, because that's really what I did. I had to go through them, and then I discovered the various changes or things that didn't exist anymore, and then that sometimes led to new paths or things that were not already in there, but I could see it being very difficult. You're sort of starting from zero. Yeah, so to have some previous knowledge which is which On the Move has, luckily, is just a very big help. Yeah.
What was striking for me when reviewing all these funds and working with Claire to put together all the publications or all your research is that many aspects that we try to monitor. So, is there a particular focus on gender equality? Is there a particular focus on environmental sustainability? Do we have a particular awareness in relation to vulnerable groups that need special support? So, all these, I would say, societal emergencies or transversal issues were quite rarely addressed. Would you agree with this? I see
Yes.
nodding.
I mean, there was very few mentions of these dimensions, really. I mean, but we can, on the other hand, say that in these last years, it seems like there are new opportunities for families or for older artists, because that can also be difficult to be an older artist. And there exist these, since this is about younger artists, there are the calls for under 35 or under 40, but mostly I think these are one-off calls and often associated to some kind of project, so they're not really part of this reoccurring amount of funds that we were looking into. That's how I found it, because of course I would look at something and then I would go, oh no, but that's not reoccurring, so it's not going to enter this one, but it does exist. Yeah.
That's interesting. That is more project-based support than
Mm-hmm.
regular and stable funding. For you, Anna, in Sweden, what was your feeling?
No, I mean, I agree with Kama definitely that there is not, if any, funds that has these yeah, specific pinpoints of green traveling or special support. In this sense, there is one that is included in the Sweden part that is for emerging dancers up to 30 years. But other than that, there is not much of these reoccurring. It's a private foundation. There's not much, if any, of the reoccurring that has pinpointed these things. So If you compare to Cultural Moves Europe, for example, they are, I would say, a little bit ahead of the national funding schemes in at least when it comes to the Swedish context.
Yeah, and I guess it's true for many contexts. It feels that for those of you, dear participants, who don't know, Culture Moves Europe is a European mobility grant program supported by the Creative Europe program, and it's been managed for the last three, even a little bit more years by the Goethe Institute in Brussels. And it's a funding program that allows not only artists and cultural professionals to access travel money, to be able to go and explore, different opportunities. Might be a residency, might be presenting work, networking, attending a conference, etc. But also for residency centers to actually access funding to welcome artists in their spaces and provide the necessary support for that. Of course, when we say Europe, we always think EU 27, but as we all need to remember ourselves, Creative Europe covers 40 countries, so goes beyond, of course, the 27 member states. Anna, you were both touching upon the support or specific support towards young and emerging artists, which is, a topic that we want to investigate a little bit further today. And you were mentioning that there is not really a clear strategy, let's say, or a policy orientation tackling the specific needs. I was wondering, because you are both professionals and you've been very active in your professional trajectory, reaching out to many artists, but also having your own experience supporting projects, programming, etc. How do you feel? Do you feel there is a need to have a special focus towards the young and emerging, or there is enough, in a way, opportunities in terms of funding, etc., and programs, so we don't need to pay more attention, at least in the two contexts you are active in? Anna.
I will say both yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, definitely, because I would say in the main funding scheme there is quite focus on that you're established and your portfolio and so forth. And this is of course not in favor of or favorable for young and emerging artists. So in that sense, yes. And I would say in general, I think mobility schemes are a very, very good tool to also to stimulate internationalization, because that's where everything starts. So you go to an event, or you go on a study visit, or you go on a residency or whatever, and from there you build your network, and then from that you start to collaborate and maybe build bigger projects, and in a few years you end up doing a bigger, for example, Creative Europe project. But it all starts with the network and the connection and the connections. So based on that, I think what you get out of the money that you put into mobility is not that costly, but you get a lot of value for the money. So definitely, I would say yes, and also absolutely targeted to young and emerging artists, because that's where everything starts. Also.
Yeah, and it feels, what we observe also from the movies, there is because some funds are shrinking, there is an enormous competition. And then it means that young and emerging artists are competing with their peers with way more experience. And evaluators and jury members, etc., committees tend to favor the ones that have already proven, that they are able to manage projects, to develop projects, to have an international exposure, etc., etc. How do you feel come out around this, around a specific support for the young and emerging, or the existing pool of schemes is sufficient in a way?
I would just support Hanna in what she's saying, that, or you also said that the competition is hard, and the way to start is to somehow get out there in a workshop, in a project, during your studies, the whole network thing. But having said that, I mean, there's still maybe some kind of need. This was actually mentioned last week in the webinar, or in the last webinar, that maybe some structures for advising, or some mentoring, or something that could guide people to how do you get this first workshop opportunity in another country. And then of course the big thing, because there are young artists who you could say get away with going from, in a very nomadic way, going from residency to residency and trying to keep their costs down, but still they're often not really getting paid, and it's very precarious, and it can work for a while and you're building up your network, but just the moment that something goes wrong, or that if you're not really being paid or affiliated in the formal way, in some social and tax system, then once something goes wrong, then you can be in a very bad situation for social security issues, all these kind of things. So this thing about the lacking payment, also for all this time that it takes to to find all these opportunities and react to them and send a lot of applications that you may not be granted. It is a fragile system in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to bring that aspect in the conversation, especially because sometimes I feel we need also to remind ourselves that I mean, of course, we are all the three of us, we are based in Europe, but many of the young artists and young culture professionals are based outside of Europe, and have an extra layer of struggle, not only in terms of competition to access opportunities or travel grants, but also to access visa, you know, etc., etc. So we have different layers of complexities, and being a young and emerging artist in this visa limbo could be particularly difficult, because you need to prove, you need to have income, you need to, demonstrate a lot of things and provide a lot of material that doesn't exist when you're young and emerging. So there is a paradox there that is sometimes very difficult to navigate in terms of as you said, Anna, the beautiful internationalization aspect that needs to arrive pretty early on in one's career, and at the same time, the reality of having all these impediments or obstacles because of being very young. Okay. Look, I'm gonna stop this chat here, but we might come back to you, of course, especially as I'm encouraging the participants to post comments and questions. So, you can ask our speakers later on. I will come back to this, but I want to give the floor to Claire, because Claire, you will now be presenting this other publication, and I think it will somehow intersect with some of what we said. So, Claire, the floor is yours. I'll let you share your screen.
Sure. So thank you. I'll just present myself. So I'm a woman in her 40s with short hair, and I'm wearing glasses. So I think what I will be presenting is the Cultural Mobility Yearbook for 2025. And I think it's a real balance from what we've just been talking about. So we've been talking about the funding guides, which are really the long-term, the ongoing, the sort of in some ways more stable funding that might be sort of 10 years. It might have changes, but there's the sort of the more steady continuity. And on the Move website, we have the other side, which is our news section, which is publishing opportunities and open calls, which are the more short term. So this can range from a once-off project, or it could be, say, a 3-year project that they might have calls throughout that period, but it's not an ongoing so it's not an ongoing opportunity. So we started the yearbooks in 2021. So this is the 4th edition. And what we do is we analyze these calls that we put on our website from January to December each year. So I'll just explain a bit about what the characteristics are of what we publish. So as I said, it's not the ongoing calls, which are in the funding guides, but the other ones that kind of fall through the gaps. They always support some form of mobility, and they are funded opportunities. So it might be that there's funding for the travel, the mobility itself, or there's some kind of grant that can cover the mobility. There's no application fees, and it's open to all nationalities. So we don't publish so many of the bilateral opportunities that might just be open for one nationality to do a mobility. And it covers all artistic fields, and it's opportunities for artists, culture professionals, and cultural organizations. So I'll just share my screen because there's might be useful. All right, so that everyone can see that well? Fantastic. So just to give a bit of an overview, in 2024, there were 643 calls that were published, and it involves 107 countries. So this is, when we talk about the countries that it involves, it's the organizers who are putting out the call, and it's where the people are traveling to. So we can't necessarily capture the beneficiaries of this travel. So we don't know how many people are necessarily applying or where they're from, or that kind of more detailed mobility. So it's really looking at the organizers and where the mobility is going. So there are a couple of kind of key areas that we capture when we're looking at this information. So one element is the sort of online and in-person. And after 2021, this really dropped off a lot. So this past year in 2024, it was a bit over 80% was in person, and the rest were either mixed or online. And I think this is quite an interesting element to keep tracking, because as Johan was mentioning as well about the challenges of visas, and also Kama was mentioning, it's quite precarious to always be traveling around, so that the online or hybrid can either bring sort of an ongoing engagement with the mobility. So if it's a short mobility, the hybrid form can sort of engage you earlier in training or in some kind of support or some kind of connecting, so that you can make the most of your time when you get there. But it can also open up access for people who might not be able to travel for whatever reason, for visa issues, or it might be for caring responsibilities or for disabilities. So there could be very many reasons why online could be a good option. So it's a bit, online is always very challenging, as we all know, but it's interesting to see that this has really dropped and it hasn't really recovered. So it's sort of everyone's gone back to mostly online. Residencies were the biggest opportunity type, so it's almost 50%, and I think that's quite interesting, as we were saying, that there might be this format of kind of traveling from residency to residency as a way, particularly as an emerging artist, kind of fund a practice. And I think it was mentioned in one of the other webinars that this can be a way to build networks as well. So it seems to be a form that we have a lot of open calls for. And so sorry, let's try and go to the next one. So we also track what kind of people, what kind of applicants these opportunities are open for. So mostly it's for individuals and groups. So the groups could be organizations or collectives or duos as well. And that most of our opportunities are for artists, followed by producers and managers. We've got smaller amounts for policy makers or researchers and curators. So we also look a bit at a creative field. So in the overall calls, this is relatively balanced, with cross-disciplinary being the highest amount. So this could be cross-disciplinary in it's open to any art form, but also there's I would say maybe a trend of working across sectors as well. So in the cross-disciplinary, you would see projects which are open to working with science labs, for example, or different sectors as kind of bringing an artist in to work with these different spaces, these very more technical spaces. So that's quite interesting to see. So in terms of some of the things that we're particularly keeping an eye out for, one is looking at the environment and sustainability as a theme. So that there were a bit over 13% of the calls were labelled as being related to this in 2024. However, it is interesting to note that this did not necessarily come with additional support, particularly in terms of mobility. So there were not that many open calls, which also provided more funding, for example, slower mobility or more sustainable ways of travelling, which often is more expensive. So I think we really saw a trend, as we mentioned with the Culture Moves Europe program. So we would put up several of those calls. So they'd received a Culture Moves Europe grant, and then they might have an open call. Say if it's a residency program, they might then call out for 5 residents for their program. So then they had the capacity to offer extra funding for green travel, for access and support. So we saw a lot of the additional funding for green travel came also through the Culture Moves Europe program, which is interesting to note. But aside from that, there's a lot of people interested in the theme, but not so much on the financial support for it. So looking at the regions, I won't go too much into this, and it would be interesting if you are from a particular region or you're interested in it to look at the whole yearbook, because there's a lot of detail in that. But in each of the regions, we sort of go into more detail about how many calls and the sort of characteristics of the calls. But we can see that Europe remains the region with the greatest number of calls. There were more calls in the Americas and Asia in 2024, but also something we notice is that there is overwhelmingly more calls within each region. So you have less of the Americas to Asia or sort of Asia to Africa or Africa to Europe. So, I mean, there is movement there, and as you can see from this graph where it kind of lies, but it's definitely, there's much more mobility within the one region. So thinking about, so as in the yearbook, what we do is we kind of look at the same data each year, so we kind of can see the trends as it goes. But we also every year we pick a theme for a section of the yearbook and really focus on what's happening in that theme. So this year it's looking at young and emerging arts workers. So in addition to the general data that we're looking at, we sort of looked in more detail at the young and emerging and saw what's going on here. So the first thing that that kind of came up was the definition of young and emerging. So we didn't have necessarily a tick box which says this is for young and emerging. So what we did is we had to kind of look into the way the calls presented themselves. So whether that's in the titles, the descriptions, and one of the things that first came up was the definition of it. So there were different ways of saying what is emerging. You know? So one of the common ones were the age ranges. So we had calls between 13 and 40 of years old, but the main ones were between 18 and about 30 to 35. Another way is creative output. So having a limited number of works produced. And this really it changed a lot depending on the sector as well. And I think the level of emerging is quite different. So if, for example, you have a published work as a writer, it might take longer to get there than it might be to sort of have a couple of fringe theatre performances so so it changed a lot, I think, between creative practices. Another way was years working, so the first 1 to 5 years of a career. So this had some interesting examples in that some people were acknowledging that not everyone goes through formal education, or not everyone has the same opportunities depending on the region of where you live and your funding context as well. So there are a couple of examples where they would change the definition or the number of years or the limitations, depending, for example, if you're from Europe or not from Europe. So I think that that is kind of interesting to kind of acknowledge the different context in which people are working. But there were also some interesting ways that people were trying to move beyond these kind of definitions of what is emerging. And it kind of, I think, speaks to the ongoing complexities of creative practice. So that once we've emerged, that's, you know, we're done. We're sort of mid-career now. It was kind of acknowledging more that this perhaps is a more complex process. It's not like you're emerged and you're done and then that's it. No? So there was some calls that were saying had other kind of definitions of emerging, like those who were wanting to change field. So their new field, they might be more inexperienced and they might not have the same opportunity. So in a way, they're kind of emerging again. Those working on a particular topic for the first time, or working in a particular context, which they need sort of to help in navigating in a way, maybe. Those branching beyond their national context as well, which I think was discussed in one of the other webinars, you know, that the networking, building your network is very important. And then if you change your national context, you might feel like you're starting again because you have to leave behind your network in some cases. And also those gaining a new set of skills. So these were some more detailed ways that people were kind of defining young and emerging in the open calls that we found. So in terms of the number of calls, we had 84 calls that were specifically for young and emerging arts workers. We had an additional 37 calls which referenced young and emerging, as well as being for more advanced practitioners. So in total, if you count both of them, it's sort of about 18 or 19% of our calls were mentioning young and emerging. So that, I mean, obviously that doesn't mean that young and emerging artists can't go for the other calls as well, but that these were specifically targeted for them. So in this next bit, I'll be talking mainly about the 84 calls, which were specifically for the young and emerging. So I've just sort of put a bit of a comparison here. So on one side, I have the young and emerging, and then on the other side, I have the general calls, just to highlight a few of the differences that we found. So I don't have it here, but one of the ones that we did find is that there are more hybrid and online calls for young and emerging compared to the overall calls. So so I said that it was about 80% was in person for the overall calls, and for the young and emerging, the in-person calls are like 67%. So it's quite a big difference. Some other differences were this one about the cultural field. So as we can see, the performing arts, followed by visual arts and design, are the more common creative fields, then followed by cross-disciplinary. So I'm not sure if there's some kind of observation there about sort of needing more experience in one's own field before branching beyond into cross-disciplinary. But I thought that was an interesting difference. Also, another thing which I think is quite relevant, and the differences between the calls, was the types of opportunities that were available. So residencies were still the most common, followed by training and fellowships, which I guess kind of makes sense from what we've been talking about a bit, and that transition from maybe being in an education context to sort of bridging out to working in the field. So how do we go about this? Maybe it's by shorter training programs. Residencies was mentioned in one of the other webinars as a way to kind of build networks and to reach internationally as well. But I think it's significant that where presenting work is the second most common in the overall calls, it is much lower for young and emerging artists. So it might be that in these open calls, there's a need to sort of prove oneself a bit more through residencies and training and other programs before presenting work. But I think it also makes it complex for emerging and young artists to get the experience in presenting work when it's sort of there aren't as many opportunities for them targeted for them. And I think in presenting work in the data that we have here, part of that was also presenting as part of a residency as well. So all that presenting work isn't all just presenting by itself, but sometimes it's a residency with an exhibition at the end or those kind of formats as well. So just a few more elements. So most of the calls were from organisers based in Europe, about 74%. About 35% of the calls received EU funding. And another part that I thought is kind of worth mentioning here is that we also track what we call access costs. And so access costs are for to provide additional finance for things like support if you have a disability or if you have a caring responsibility. And there were only 2 calls of the emerging and young arts workers that provided these additional costs. So it is potentially quite challenging for someone, for example, a young and emerging artist who has a disability, to then access many of these open calls. So their support for this is much reduced, and so I think that's kind of worth highlighting. It is true that in our open calls generally, that's a small percentage. It's under 5%, but I think it's an area that could be worth kind of developing a bit more. So I think I'll just stop sharing here. So just to kind of summarize, I think that the emerging is sort of an ongoing process. So it's not something that's sort of finished and done. But then perhaps we can have more thinking about what we mean by emerging, and how we, in the context of releasing open calls, how we open the door for emerging artists as well, even if it's not just for emerging artists. Is there a way to sort of have phrasing within an open call that makes it welcoming for emerging artists to apply, for example? Potentially there could be more support for presenting work or access costs for emerging artists. And just wondering, sort of in looking at these definitions, and also the idea that you need some experience before you can be an emerging artist, makes me wonder how we bridge that gap and if we're leaving some people behind. I'll pass it
Wonderful.
back to you, Johan.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation. It's a super difficult exercise because there's so much data that you extracted actually to compose the yearbook, and I mean to have a snapshot in a way, a sample of all these facts and figures. But thank you for picking, you know, elements that can inspire also this kind of reflection, as you were mentioning in the end, the recommendation on how we can rethink the funding mechanism, but also the criteria or the eligibility and the wording also. And this is something that I feel intersect with other accessibility issues that we've seen at On the Move in the context of other webinars and other research projects, is the second you don't name it, people don't feel included. And it's the case for Indigenous artists, it's the case for artists with disabilities, it's the case for many communities that feel sometimes not included in, you know, an open call. Okay, I'm sure we have questions, comments, reactions, feedback, whatever you want to call it. So please don't hesitate to raise your hands, dear participants, your digital hands, so I can see I have you on my screen, and I'm very happy to leave the floor to you. I know that we had a question already a little earlier by Caroline Stegemann. I don't know if Caroline, you want to ask your question directly and take the floor, or I will, you know, read your questions to our panelist. Yes.
Hello.
Hello,
Yes,
hello.
I can do this. As it's a very simple and very basic question. So first of all, thank you very much for all the information and the chat. It's very basic. So what would be your advice, so from your experience speaking, to start? So making the first step in working internationally, for example, because we all know you need an invitation for Cultural Moves Europe. What if you can't afford to get the connection locally? What if you can't travel there for the first time and say, hi, I'm very interested in your institution? So what would you recommend in terms of needing an invitation?
That's a very good question. Where to start? I love it. And I will ask this question to our three guests, speakers today. So to Kama, to Claire, and to Anna. Maybe I can start with you, Anna, because I'm sure you get these kind of questions quite often as you run the International Resource Office and support the internationalization of Skåne-based operators and players. So, Anna.
I would say start connecting digitally. So reach out maybe with an email, and then you have an online meeting, and then you can get an invitation letter maybe to go there for the first time. So start to build the connections with the resources that are closest to hand, which is I think the digital resources.
Digital. Kama, what would be your advice?
I would say that you could also go a different way, like see what's available on the moves calls, and just maybe not. I mean, it's good to be focused and know what you want to do and to have a kind of a plan. But I think we also all know that this field is very flexible and new things arrive. So maybe also to just scan what's out there, and maybe there's something you didn't know about and you find it interesting, and you can react to maybe a residency, or maybe somehow get to a workshop. If you do it a long time in advance, maybe you can have time to apply for some money to support some travel. So this is a different approach that maybe I say I want to go specifically to this place and try the digital way, which is great. But the other ways, maybe also a way to just scan and see what's out there. And because there are lovely residencies, for instance, where you don't know who the other artists are there for a residency, for instance, and maybe something happened that you would not have anticipated. So it's a different kind of approach that might also work. So a little bit going with the coincidence in a way, or the intuitive. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for this advice. And I will give the floor to Claire, who is the one also side posting many of these opportunities on the Move website. So Claire, what would be your advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Kama and Hanna mentioned are both very interesting. No? If you have like this idea or this sort of project and you think, okay, who might be really interesting, or I just want to have a conversation with this person, and kind of open it with a really, I don't know, with a curiosity or a project-led idea is definitely one way. And I think what Kama was saying as well is that it can be very interesting to also not have the idea, and just kind of explore. And I think looking at all the calls that we have on the Move, they range from like a very small scale to enormous projects, to residencies where it's a month, to a short-term residency. So, and I think it's always worth just trying, because you never really know who else is applying, or if they just like the idea, or maybe you have a lot of national experience but no international experience, and you might be a bit intimidated. But maybe that's exactly what they're looking for. So I think always, I mean, it's very time consuming as well, and it can sort of feel a bit disheartening if you get lots of refusals. But you just kind of don't count yourself out before putting your hand up, I would say.
Thank you. That's also a nice advice. I will add mine, because why not? I would say talk to friends. Your colleagues, your friends, your peers next to you, really next to you, from your class, your former teachers, etc. I mean, they have probably an advice also for you, or a tip, or a contact. So sometimes it's we try to look very far away for an information that our friend, literally your neighbor, has. So the idea of proximity and human contact is also very, very both organic and simple. So I would always, talk to friends. Okay, we might have a question or a comment from our participants. And don't be shy, to quote my colleague Marie, like really, we are between us, and there's absolutely no silly comments or questions. So don't hesitate to ask. I would maybe ask a couple of questions to Claire. I mean, I would like us to react to Claire's presentation. So not only me, but also Kama and Anna, in terms of all the statistics we observe. And especially, I mean, what was striking for me, for example, was that in some art forms, you clearly have an appetence or an abundance, or it looks like there's more openness to support the young and emerging artists. So, for example, in the music field, you feel there is more opportunities and more, support, as it is expected for young musicians and young and new bands, etc., to travel the world. I was wondering how far we can extrapolate, or imagine that for some art forms there are very strong obstacles compared to others. I was very impressed in our last webinar, talking about poetry and the beautiful work carried out by Versopolis, the EU platform, and the support they provide to young, or let's say emerging, in that case, poets, but also how long it takes to actually, establish yourself as a poet, and the parallel that was made for architects, and how long it takes also for you to work and establish yourself as an architect. I was wondering if you had any insight or feedback or idea of some art forms that were really you against, or I don't know how to say that.
Yeah, and I think so. Looking at the types of opportunities that are available across different art forms, perhaps can give us some insight. So residencies and fellowships were the two that represented the most number of art forms. But you mentioned literature, and that's an interesting one because they only had opportunities in residencies and fellowships. So they didn't have the meeting, go and see type opportunities. They didn't have presenting opportunities. Maybe that's because of it's the way it is, like you need to go through the publisher. But I think that also potentially pushes aside other kind of literature forms, so performing the spoken word, performing works. So maybe they sort of hustle in on another side and kind of go in through the performing arts, but it doesn't feel like there's the diversity of mobility options for certain sectors. And I think from the information we have, it's difficult to know time frames, but as I was mentioning before, and I think as was mentioned in the webinar, that for literature, for example, you need to kind of establish yourself nationally, and then you have to it's quite arduous to get the first translations and that kind of thing. So I guess residencies are a way to explore and to kind of build networks, but in terms of kind of producing and getting an income from the work, then it's much more reduced and perhaps takes 10 years to be emerging, as opposed to some more small scale opportunities that you can see in performing arts, where there's the smaller infrastructure perhaps. So the smaller theatres and the smaller festivals that have the capacity to offer these smaller grants for those who are emerging. Whereas I guess if you're a literature house, publishing house, sorry, doing literature, then it's a very different model. So even the smaller publishing houses, it's a different structure. So they don't have the capacity to sort of invite writers. So I think it's definitely there. We didn't capture that time frame, partly because we're not capturing the beneficiaries in a way. So it would be interesting to do, but I guess that's a much bigger project to be able to sort of say who's getting these fundings, how emerging were they, how much experience did they have actually. So.
Well, thank you for this. Thank you. I don't know, Anna or Kama, do you have questions also for Claire on the yearbook?
I had some reflections from your presentation. It's when it comes to the Swedish perspective, it's about also definitions, because I wouldn't be able to say on the spot what is the translation of young and emerging artists in Swedish, because that's not how you phrase it, and or how you define it, because we rather tend to speak about professional, semi-professional, and amateur, and it's make things complicated when it comes to the funding schemes, because if you don't have the definition, it's also harder to target a support, right? So there's really some room for development, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think the navigating these calls is particularly challenging as well for young and emerging, because you might have a particular context, as you were saying, that it's semi-professional and amateur, and then you're looking for these international calls, and you say, well, do I fit? And are these requirements on a national level? Is it international? So it can be the definitions and the way we speak about these opportunities can be quite a minefield, I think.
You are muted, Johanna.
giving you the floor, Kama. Thank you.
It might also be that there are some opportunities hidden that are not really, like Claire said, no, that Hanna said, that are written exactly in the calls. And in this mapping position that we had, we did not contact any funders. But if you are a person and you find a call and you are maybe working in literature or whatever, maybe there is a call that doesn't mention literature, but still you can challenge it and are able to apply for it. But of course, you should not maybe waste your time too much, but then you can always contact the foundation and see if you can get some kind of answer. Again, just pushing the systems a bit maybe could work sometimes.
Yeah. And just to follow on with that and thinking about the Nordic Baltic Guide, that there were several opportunities that we had conversations about and we couldn't include because they didn't explicitly say this is for international mobility. But if you read between the lines, particularly on a municipality or a city level or a local level, I think there can be room there for a good idea as well. So that although it didn't say, okay, this is for international projects, you could invite someone and the door wasn't 100% closed. So I think there's many opportunities like that around as well.
Okay, thank you, Claire, and thank you both. So if we don't have more comments and questions from the participants, what I will ask, I will probably ask Andrew to take the floor and share what for him was his takeaways or main points, or what resonated with his own, trajectory in a way. So Andrew, do you feel like sharing your takeaways now?
Yeah, definitely. It's been good to listen to everything. Just to quickly describe myself, I'm a black male. I have silver rimmed glasses. I have a septum piercing, long black dreads. I'm wearing a black jumper. I have a silver chain on, and I have a blurred background, which is my room. It's it's been great to hear the conversation and actually be able to digest everything before giving an overview. So, just to kind of take it back from the beginning, Johan first asked Hanna and Kama in terms of their own experiences as young professionals. And I think what stood out to me was the importance of education. Even within my own journey, my first opportunity to work internationally was through doing a year abroad in my university degree. And I did a year in Berlin, and I managed to kind of network and get involved in some of the art scene there. So education is usually kind of perhaps the earliest opportunity and definitely probably the most financially viable opportunity to first work internationally, because, you're more supported in a university context and you have that kind of safety net perhaps than whether you're in your professional life. So definitely the importance of education as being a gateway to international work stood out for me. And also, Kama talking about EU projects as well. So yeah, the importance of that. And then the importance that arts organizations and funders play within that ecology. And we know that often kind of shifts and changes, but they have a role to play within that as well. We then went on to talk about the new Cultural Mobility Guide, which is focused on the Nordic Baltic regions and the different kind of funding opportunities and the national mapping that had. Second question, how easy or hard was it to find the information that was put into that guide? And both Hanna and Kama were definitely grateful for the previous guide as a starting point. But again, kind of having to do that research and actually learning about the impact of COVID. I think that's something that anecdotally I definitely feel had a massive shift on people's mobility and the ability to kind of move around, and changes to public funding. From my experience working within Arts Council, public funding is often kind of, led by different agendas, and those agendas change all the time. Sometimes it's important to support particular communities or particular cause, and other times, different things kind of take precedent and different things kind of get prioritized. And again, as an artist, you have to always navigate that world where there's periods where there's more opportunities that probably fit you as an artist, whether that be your practice, whether that be your identity. And other times it might be a period of time where, the work is not really necessarily targeted towards you. And that shifting always happens. I think within that question, in terms of how hard is it to find the information and this kind of recognition from both Kama and Hanna, that it would have been very difficult to start from scratch and start from zero. And that, made me think about that importance of information gathering and knowledge sharing. And I think as an artist and within the community, artists, arts organizations, cultural figures, I've always felt that it's important that each one teach one. The information that we gain on our journeys is important some way to kind of pass that on to artists that are going to need that information. Is something I've always been within my own life, a big ethos for me in terms of, how do we give back? And a lot of artists struggle with this kind of lack of centralized information. And I think, it's important, all the different resources that have been shared today have done a really good job of collating information in one place that's accessible, that sense of accessibility and feeling like, you don't have access to that knowledge to make those decisions and to find out opportunities. So I think it's very important about having that kind of, knowledge gathering and sharing. We talked about how kind of funding has shifted in a sense to kind of be more project-based support, which again had me thinking of the very precariousness of funding, which is kind of innate to the whole notion of funding. But it shows, it's a very precarious position that we're in currently. Sometimes there is that kind of lack of long-term vision, but not necessarily at the fault of funders, but because they're kind of operating on, maybe 3 or 4, 5 year basis. But, what do things look like in 10 years? And again, from my experience in Arts Council, it was something I always kind of pushed in terms of we can make decisions now that might benefit in 2 or 3 years, but is there a way that we can kind of have some long-termism and long-term thinking and that real sustainable thinking when we're kind of creating opportunities? What does this look like in 5 to 10 years rather than 1, 2, or 3 years? So again, that's something I think that is a grapple in the world of funding in terms of, balancing those kind of short-term actions and project-based actions with that more longer-term sustained support. Johan then went on to ask a question in terms of, is there a need for a specific focus on young and emerging artists and to have more targeted opportunities for them? Hanna kind of said yes and no, that most schemes tend to be targeted towards those who are more established with a strong portfolio, which obviously goes against young and emerging artists. But it was noted that kind of mobility schemes are a really good springboard to kind of build your network and expand your horizons and kind of gain value beyond just the monetary elements that come with that, but actually, experience as an artist, building your network, connecting with different communities, etc. And obviously, due to a kind of shrinking in funding, there tends to be a lot of competition. And again, being on a lot of panels, I tend to work with a lot with music panels, PRSF Foundation, for example. There is, a massive increase in competition. So this kind of can sometimes lend itself to a scarcity mentality where artists kind of feel like they're competing against one another. And, how do we combat this? What is the role that we all play in ensuring that there is enough to go around, or that we don't kind of feed into a crabs in a bucket mentality where people feel like, I have to compete and I don't want to share knowledge. I want to, kind of hold everything to myself. But actually, how do we get that more community feel? How do we support one another within the work? Kama kind of echoed Hanna's sentiment and also highlighted the importance of structured advice, mentoring and guidance in supporting international mobility, which I think are also, very, very important. And I think, again, goes back to what I said previously in terms of ensuring that, within this sphere of arts and culture, we do our best to kind of open that door for the people that come after us. There was a small conversation about kind of nomadic artists, which tend to be kind of centered on artists that might kind of float from residency to residency, which can help in building that network and kind of building a profile. But oftentimes, again, that's also precarious and not necessarily financially stable. And that kind of highlights how fragile the system can be. And then also kind of acknowledging the fact that for people not based in Europe, there's an extra layer of bureaucracy with visas, etc., particularly now. So that's something, again, that kind of, we must, keep in mind when we talk about these opportunities and the mobility of artists. We then moved on to Claire's presentation and talking about the Cultural Mobility Yearbook, which was, filled with a lot of data, a lot of interesting kind of takeaways for me, that some that kind of fit what I kind of think I already knew intuitively, and some things that, kind of were surprising for me. So just a bit about the Cultural Yearbook. A lot of the funds tend to be quite short term, and tended to support, some form of mobility. And within the Cultural Yearbook, they highlight funds that don't have application fees, that are open to all nationalities and open to both artists, cultural professionals, and organizations as well. Some of my key takeaways from the presentation was the kind of the popularity of residencies and being the kind of the most dominant opportunity by, almost 50%. This kind of rise in hybrid opportunities and online opportunities, which I think kind of is emblematic of the kind of world we're living in now, where we have this kind of digital as well as in-person element to our existence. Individual opportunities for artists being the most popular call out. So individuals and artists rather than kind of cultural professionals or organizations. The kind of the popularity of cross-disciplinary and visual arts and design. And I think for me, my key takeaway from that is that I feel like in contemporary arts and culture, most artists do have to be multidisciplinary in some ways. I think there has been like an inevitable amalgamation, and that kind of skill set kind of transfers over. So, in my own network and in my own life, most artists I know kind of do multiple things. They might have a particular focus, but I think, the contemporary world forces you, if you want to be flexible and access different opportunities, you have to kind of have more strings to your bow. So I feel like that really speaks to, that notion of most artists having to be like, you know what, I might have to kind of learn a new skill. I might be a musician, but why don't I learn graphic design as well, or learn how to engineer? These kind of things that are all linked with your main art form, but give you a different skill set within that. I think for me, paradoxically, it was interesting to see there's been this rise of consciousness and awareness, obviously, regarding sustainability and the environment, and people kind of putting out call outs for projects that have that at the forefront. But that's not necessarily been supplemented with extra funding and extra income. And again, I think what that demonstrates is that ideology does tend to move quicker than money and the resources. I think organizations might kind of have a feeling of, we want to be doing this or supporting work that looks like this, but that's not necessarily always followed by actually having that resource to be able to do that. So there tends to be sometimes a tension or a gap between kind of ideologically the work we're looking for, but what is actually resourced and where does the funding actually go? And I think that is also a constant process of kind of negotiation as well. Europe having the largest number of call outs, which wasn't really surprising for me. And then kind of we talked about definitions, which I think are always kind of a woolly thing in this work. What do we mean by young and emerging, and the kind of the multitude of ways in which we can describe that? Is it an age range? Is it about the creative output? Is it the years that you've been working? And I think that's quite an interesting thing as well. And I feel like for me, I think emerging is, we're always emerging. To me, the term emerging is kind of moves beyond the individual artist, and this kind of speaks to kind of humanity itself. As human beings, we are consistently kind of emerging, and it's a process of kind of growth and death and destruction and rebirth. So I think the work always kind of follows suit. So, we're all emerging. And so in my way, it's kind of like, what makes someone young and emerging versus not. I don't think there's ever a point where an artist feels like, okay, this is it. There's always something new, tends to be on the horizon. So I find that to be quite an interesting discussion on definitions, and then the differences in kind of experience based on where you are. Different places have, based on your education level, or, living in a place that has particularly low access of opportunities. And again, kind of a microcosm of that, I'll give an example of here in Wales, kind of, there's a real split in resources between South and North Wales, for example. There's a kind of geographical barrier, but that also means that more opportunities go to the south rather than the north. So the north based artists will have a totally different lived experience of being an artist than the South Wales based artists. And again, we kind of see that play out across multiple forms. And then I think it was interesting that there wasn't as many opportunities for young people to solely present work, that it all tends to be kind of through the lens or prisms of kind of residencies and fellowship. But actually, what about the presentation of work, which is also a very key element in being an artist, particularly at a certain stage? So, again, what can we do to make sure that we're not leaving people behind and make sure that people do have the opportunity to present work? Obviously, the creation of the work is very important and is a integral part of the process, but so is that presentation. And I think, what happens to artists if they're not given that platform to be able to present themselves in that way. We then moved on to, actually, I'll go back and talk about the panel response then as well to the yearbook before I talk about the Q&A. Johan mentioned that it seems that some art forms might have more obstacles than others. And particularly, we had a focused conversation on literature and the way in literature only had kind of residencies and fellowships. And again, it ties back into that conversation about emerging, that even within certain art forms, that period or process of emerging looks very different. And, for literature, it could be 10 years that you're an emerging poet or writer, whereas, maybe in visual arts or in music, there's a much shorter time span in which kind of things accelerate. So again, different art forms have different experiences within that. And yeah, there's some kind of negative impact, for example, like the spoken word, there might not be so many opportunity for spoken word artists to go and perform, but I guess, yeah, it's something that we kind of manifest differently depending on kind of which art form and definitely where you live. I think one thing I picked up on is obviously the fact that the yearbook doesn't necessarily focus on the beneficiaries. So in my mind, some of the data that I would be intrigued to seeing would be like the kind of split across like, protected characteristics, what was the gender split of opportunities, what was the kind of the split of maybe ethnicity in terms of maybe there were specific opportunities for people from specific ethnicities or specific countries. I think that would be kind of would fill in some of the blanks maybe, or provide that kind of extra richness of data in terms of seeing, again, where are those kind of divergence in experience and where are those kind of connectivities in experience, depending on kind of, where you're based or what your lived experience is. And then there was a conversation as well about sometimes the opportunity being implicit and sometimes it's not explicit within an opportunity that is for international mobility or for young and emerging. But actually, if you read between the lines, there's kind of ways that you might be able to navigate that or build a project that still is kind of suited to you. And then lastly, going back then to the Q&A, the main question I was asked would be, what would be your advice to start working internationally? Hanna mentioned about connecting digitally and online and working with the kind of resources that are closest to hand. Similar to what Johan said in terms of talking to friends, colleagues, peers, and that kind of proximity, start with that initial points of contact that you have and kind of build out from there. Claire mentioned that it's always worth just trying and not to count yourself out. And even if something might not be like specific to your practice, but there might be ways in which you can make it work, or, sometimes just a conversation might reveal that opportunity. And similar to what Kama said, see what's available and maybe tailor your approach to that. So, even though you might have a concrete idea, sometimes there's ways you can pivot to still kind of reach that conclusion, but maybe in a different way. And I think, that is everything I took away from the conversation.
Thank you, Andrew. That's a lot already. I feel it's also fantastic because your takeaways are so rich that I'm looking forward also to next week, where you will be presenting exactly these takeaways at the forum to all the people that will be attending the forum. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Do you have any reaction or something we missed? Kama, Claire, Anna, any last points you wanted to make before I wrap up this webinar? Kama?
I just felt that it's important maybe to repeat something that also was mentioned in the last pre-forum, that these concerns about sustainability and climate changes and this idea of going longer and slower, maybe you don't have to go this and there and everywhere, but maybe you can find ways to stay longer in the same place and in that way get something different out of it. Like you might connect more to the people you are, if it's a residency, or to the local people, or So just this notion that I think follows the way we are thinking about sustainability today.
Mhm. Okay, right. Claire, you wanted to add a word?
No, I was just saying that nothing to add. I think there's many very interesting points, and I think it was really building across the pre-forum webinars and many links that were there.
Thank you, Anna.
There are many takeaways, so thank you so much, everyone. But I can build also on what you said, Kama. I was taking a creative climate leadership course a few years ago, and my legacy project that I'm still working on is slow networking, because in the Transeurope Hall, the organization that I work, we're a membership-based organization. We have 2 meetings a year with 250, 350 people. And I mean, in terms of carbon footprint, it's not the most sustainable, but still, we need also to meet physically because there's the great value of meeting physically. So, how can we find this middle ground? Is still to explore and do it in a sustainable and a slower way.
That's a good also conclusion. Look, I'm gonna thank all of you, really, Kama, Anna, Claire, Andrew, for your contributions today. That was absolutely brilliant. And I want to thank also Marie, who was managing a lot of technical issues in the background, but also, of course, posting many useful links that I hope everybody caught, and you clicked and you downloaded, etc. So thank you to all the participants for today's conversation. Of course, I mean, I'm not going to say we are expecting you to follow, to travel to Riga because it's sold out. There's no more seats available for our forum in Riga. But of course, you can follow it online. We will live stream the event, the different panel discussions. There will be in English with live captioning, and they will be obviously recorded also and available on our YouTube channel together with all the pre-forum webinars we've hosted so far. So we are right on time. Thank you very much and be in touch. Goodbye.